Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by 3 Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for coffee and conversation. Welcome back. Today we are joined by Debra Crowe, or Deb as she's often referred to. Deb's education and career have been in disability case management, where she specialized in neurotrauma. After 23 years as an entrepreneur in the medical legal sector, Deb transitioned to become a certified executive and business coach. Deb coaches mid to upper management and C-suite executives to disrupt their habits of thinking using a science-based assessment that is based on metacognition. Deb is also the founder of Women's Self-Care Conference, which launched in Ontario in 2018. Since then, she's taken her conference across Canada to empower all women that self-care is not selfish. Deb lives life by her own unique design, and she frequently speaks on self-care across Canada and has co-authored 4 books and working on her 5th book. She's also recently launched an online course called How to Master Self-Care and a new podcast called Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast.
Well, welcome everybody, bright side of longevity. We are very fortunate today. I think the universe sort of was talking to me, of course, through the person of Mike Greenlee, who's a mutual colleague of our guest, a Renaissance man really, but a fantastic musical lyric writer who introduced us. And my conversation with Deb Crowe was just magnificent. She's an incredibly nice lady, but that's kind of redundant. She's Canadian. Everybody's nice in Canada, but she's a nice Canadian. And we have a lot in common. She has podcasts. She's a coach. I work with 2 coaches right here, Teresa and Danielle. And she has a podcast. The first title of it is Imperfect. And that fits me, for sure. It actually fits all of us. She talks a lot about leadership, which I am particularly interested in, have always been, studied it in the military, studied it in other places. And I still have a very fond feeling for what leadership can do, what bad leadership can do, what good leadership can do. And, some people may wonder, where do the leaders go when they need to talk to someone? I mean, it's lonely at the top. Leaders can be extremely lonely. Sometimes people don't understand that. And where do they go? Well, in Canada, I think they go talk to Deb because she's a magnificent coach, and we are so happy to have you here today, Deb, with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be here with you.
Such a pleasure to meet you, Deb. You have a broad range of coaching expertise. Can you tell us about that? Tell us about your executive coaching, leadership coaching, and just your coaching practice in general.
I would love to. I spent the first half of my career out of university in the disability management sector, which I loved, and had a wide array of adults and children, specialized in neurotrauma. And there was a lot of coaching going on within that because of the sectors that I worked within. So I worked in the auto insurance sector. I worked in the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board here in Canada. So if someone's seriously injured on the job. And then I started getting a lot of short-term disability claims for executives. And that led to some really heartfelt, meaningful, engaging conversation. And I realized, as much as I loved doing the work that I was doing, I landed up in hospice with some of my executives in palliative care.
Wow.
So some really interesting conversations around toxic culture. And I know Dr. Roger and I had a good conversation about, our lifestyle and how we lead it is 70% of our overall health. And just holding the hands of executives at the end of life and having them say to me, I should have spoke my truth. I should have changed the culture. I should have, stepped into my greatness. So I realized I had been coaching and I realized I was in the generalist space, and I thought I need to get on the other side of the curve and be a preventionist and help these executives as they work their way up the ladder, if you will, and hit the proverbial white ceiling. Where do they go when they get to the top? So switched over to coaching 9 years ago and really specialized in executives, C-suite leaders, executive leadership teams who step up into their greatness and really exude that heart-centered leadership.
Heart-centered leadership. I love the term. I can imagine what it involves, and I'm sure it's scant. It's nowhere near in the quantity that we need today, probably more than ever. Could you talk a little about what you mean by heart-centered leadership and why is it important?
Absolutely. 60% of us walk around with what I call a Teflon shield on our chest, that wall of resistance. And we are fearful and apprehensive to let that show amongst our peers, especially in the boardroom, especially as someone on an executive leadership team, because what if you're not at the same level as your colleagues? What if we removed that shield and lowered that wall of resistance and allowed our personality to shine more into our skill set and our agility of whatever that executive leadership, that role, responsibility, whatever it is? If we can get people to shift their habits of thinking and not get caught up in who sits in the ivory tower in the corner office, or who wears the designer suit, or who has the fancy business card or lots of initials after their name, and if we all just led with heart, openness, vulnerability, humility, integrity, because those all come from a place of tenacity and grit, which is an equation that's built over our life experience and our work experience. So I'd like to put out to the curb that success doesn't equal burnout anymore to equate what your stature is. And I can tell you that wholeheartedly because I used to manage those who were on burnout on those short-term disability claims. It's not success. It's that willingness to unlearn and relearn that it's okay to take the shield down and just be.
I love that. And I grew up in a culture I'm thinking back to when I was in college, where that's what we did. We worked 3 jobs, we went to school, we bragged about how little sleep we got. And that culture stuck for like a good 10, 15 years before I realized, this is not making me happy. So I really like your approach and the authenticity that you get people to bring, into their work experience. I also liked when I looked at your website, you have this whole section on self-care. And so can you talk a little bit about, number one, why self-care is important, but particularly for leaders?
Oh, it's my favorite topic. It was an idea I had when I closed my disability management practice. And it was so interesting because I had over 100 colleagues and customers call. And they said, "We saw the notice that you're closing. Are you sick? Do you have cancer?" And I said, "No, I'm not sick. I got a great reputation. I got a waiting list, and I'm going to shift. I'm going to shift into the other side of that curve so we can decrease these short-term disability claims. Let's rename stress with vitality and energy and self-care." And they all just thought I was crazy. And I thought, I'm going to have a conference. So, when you get those good ideas as entrepreneurs or whatever role we're in, and it's like, my intuition management said, it's a great idea, but not right now. So I shelved it, I framed it, and I just, I ruminated on it, and I had a fodder file, and every time I got a different idea, I would say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And what I did over 7 years is I crafted the vision. So I decided in the spring of 2018, I'm going to launch the first annual Women's Self-Care Conference. And of course, I didn't have it in my own city because you never try anything in your own backyard because of fear, right? So I went to Toronto and it sold out in 45 days. And I was like, oh my, 150 women, 30 vendors. All the vendors had some association to some some element of self-care, varying services, products, etc. And I remember standing on the stage giving my keynote, because I did one in the morning and one at the end of the day to close. And I said, we only grow when we decide to sit on the edge of fear with our feet dangling, ready to jump. And I said, I'm going to take this across Canada in 2019. And I got off the stage and I was like, oh my God, what did I just say? And then I thought, why not? So I went out to Western Canada and it sold out. Then I went to Eastern Canada and it sold out. And I was like, okay, now I've got the courage to come back and have the second annual in my own city. And it sold out 2 months before. And it was just unbelievable. And women were saying, I need to bring my mom. I have a coworker. I have an aunt. I have a sister. And what I realized was that I landed up doing this research, if you will, over 7 years. And then within the first year of delivery, there's a lot of generational value to self-care. So if you ask my 94-year-old mother-in-law, she'll say, oh, we always wanted to do it, dear, but we just didn't have time. You ask someone in their 60s or 70s. You ask someone who's been diagnosed with cancer and survived. So that's my goal, to stay in that preventionist space, because if I can get to you with my message, my awareness, and my education before you get a diagnosis, that's the win for me.
And what I love from the coaching perspective, you held yourself accountable. You're like,
I did.
I announced it to everybody, so now I have to do it.
Well, and I coined that self-care is not selfish, and it's opened so many beautiful conversations. I still do some consulting on insurance claims. I am one of the best people to get people back to work. It all comes down to mindset and how you frame the values and how you're feeling physically. We have to look at our best self from a holistic vantage point and not self-judge. And, I remember my Irish Nana saying, you don't have to keep up with the Joneses. And with technology, that acronym FOMO, the fear of missing out. I love the new one that came out last year, and I don't even know who to credit to, is JOMO. How about the joy of missing out? Like Sunday, I dropped the cell phone. I dropped the technology. When we grew up, Sunday was our day of rest. Nothing was open. You spent the day with the family. You had a family dinner. And I'm trying to bring that back. And it's hard because we get stuck in these habits. And I just don't want to be that connected anymore. I want to have that reprieve for self. And you just feel better. And I'm like, unless you're an on-call doc with a beeper and you need to have that, or that first responder, we do not have to adopt those values into our lives. And it's like, oh, today's a freeing day. And you just do what you want to do. And it brings me right back to where I was as a kid.
JOMO. There it is, guys. I told you she was our ilk, a member of our tribe. JOMO. I hadn't heard that. Well, there's clearly an appetite for your message. You're heard in 42 countries or something like that?
Well, it's going back to what you first asked about leadership, I decided to create a podcast again. I had one years ago and it kind of ran its course, and all my repetitive, continual conversations with my executives and my C-suite leaders were, we don't know. And I thought, okay, well then let's take that Teflon down. Tell your people you don't know, but have a resolution to the solution. Mm-hmm. What if you said you don't know? You're giving them up-to-date information that you have in the moment, because we don't have a pandemic file sitting in our filing cabinet. A lot of us weren't alive 100 years ago. So what if we just enjoy the joy in the journey and let things unfold and let that be your vision or the North Star on your compass? What are you teaching your people? Progression, communication, vulnerability, heart-centered leadership. So that's where Imperfect came, Roger. And
I love it. I mean, let's face it. I mean, not everyone wants to admit it, but it applies to all of us. Well, heart-centered leadership, you know that Teresa and Danielle and I, we work a lot with retirement communities. And of course, certainly in the U.S. and I think in Canada also, the COVID statistics are, somewhat frightening, or can be. And although they're doing a fantastic job, I mean, they deal with thousands and thousands of people and they're keeping them safe. But the reaction by some leaders has been to just sort of shut everything down and virtually put them in cells and isolate them and imprison them, basically. And we know how unhealthy that is, and we're seeing the decline. So a heart-centered approach would be one that where you use your head, but don't forget about this part, because that's critically important to be our humanity, our growth, our quality of life. So that's a fantastic message. I'm not sure that it's reaching in your country, but we're hoping with this podcast we're gonna reach a lot of people who are hungry for that message.
Well, I worked in retirement as a consultant for a number of years, and when I became a yoga teacher a couple of years ago, part of my self-care equation was always on my bucket list, and I finally just did it. When I was graduating after the year-long training, my yoga instructor said, "What is Deb Crowe going to bring to the mat?" She said, "Go away for a week, set your intention, come back and tell me, and lead your practice." And because I had devoted the first half of my career in my business to looking after those who were injured or hurt, I had a lot of elderly clients, and I thought, yoga's all inclusive. I'm bringing a chair to my mat so that I can share yoga with everyone. And I taught for 3 years in 4 different retirement homes, and my average student age was 89, and my oldest student was 104. And they loved it. And the funnest story that I'll share with you is one of my ladies, she was 92. She wanted to knit a little blanket for one of her grandchildren. It was going to be her first great-grandchild. And she couldn't remember the stitch. She could look at it, but she was just having a little bit of a cognitive disconnect. And we just kept meditating. And in yoga, intention in Sanskrit is called Sankalpa. And I said to her, let's set your Sankalpa that you're going to relax. We're really going to leave space to figure out this stitch. And it was about 3 meditations, kind of a month in, I think. And she remembered it. And then retirement home's no different than any other age or population. If someone in the group does it, it's the domino effect. Well, then the yoga classes got bigger. We had one where there was standing room only at the back. I had this wall of walkers, and some were sitting, some were standing. And to be able to bring them to such a level of relaxation, but more importantly, clarity and tapping into themselves and things that they were remembering. And I thought, what a great way to do my yoga training, and with a population that I love. So when I had to resign, they were all very sad. And I said, I've been working really hard on my coaching, and I think I'm going to have more global impact if I really move to that full time, but you have to keep doing your yoga. But I gave them a solution, right? Resolution to the solution. And I had another friend just move here from Germany who took over.
Before we wrap up, where can people go to learn more about you and your great work?
So my website is Deb Crowe, and Crowe has an E on the end. Just means I'm Irish.com. And there's lots of fun things on my website. There's self-care tools you can download, lots of content I've created. The podcast is there. So that's where you can find me.
Well, Deb, you may have heard an interesting, it's a story that in the preventive medicine world where two preventive medicine physicians are fishing and a body floats down, they drag it out, they resuscitate it, another one comes, they resuscitate it, and a third one comes, and then one of them gets up and leaves. And he says, where are you going? We got all this work to do. He says, I'm going upstream to find out what's happening, to do something about that. So If you're ever looking for Deb Crowe, Miss Jomo, she's upstream. Thanks for joining us today, Deb.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.